Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you all for coming. My name is Oliver Hicks. I'm a senior at San Luis Obispo High School. I am accompanied right now by Alexa Ford and Andre McClish, who both go to Moore Bay High School, and all of our volunteers and Women's March Slow organizers who helped us put on this event. So thank you to all of you for making sure that this was able to happen. So this town hall began as kind of a natural follow-up to the March for Our Lives that occurred a few months ago. I hope you guys all attended that as well. We wanted to continue the conversation about gun reform after kind of galvanizing the issue a few months ago. I want to reiterate that this is not a debate in any way, it's just a discussion, so as such we want to try and maintain as orderly a forum as we can so that everybody can share their ideas and hopefully learn more about this issue. Marches are really great, but nothing really gets done until we can have the civilized conversation, that always contributes to progress. So I hope everybody can help contribute to that. Again, thank you for coming. The event is split up into two parts, so it's going to start off after I'm done talking. I'm going to hand the mic over to Alexa. She's going to be moderating a discussion with each of our panelists for about an hour. That'll go until about 4:15. Then we will transition into taking questions from a few students that we have from local high schools and colleges on the Central Coast. We'll be asking our panelists questions. And then we are also going to be reading off the questions or concerns that were submitted by all of you on your index cards. So again, if you have anything that you would like to know of the panelists, please write that down on your index card. If you want the question to be asked to somebody in particular, mention that. If not, you can leave it vague. And then also, if there's a little bit of context that you'd like to give, if you are somebody who works in education, if you're a parent, if you're a student, anything like that that you would think would help give context for the question, then that would be fantastic. So now I'm going to transition over to our panel. We have a variety of representatives who will all introduce themselves in a moment. We invited more panelists to attend, but unfortunately not everybody could make it. But that being said, we're very excited about the experts that we do have here today. So that all being said, I'm going to hand the mic over to Alexa now. Oh, yeah, if you could just raise up your index cards when you're done with them, then our volunteers will come by, pick them up, and then read them at the end.
I'm Alexa Ford. I'll be moderating the panel this evening. I would quickly like to give a warm shout out to Katie Boyce and Jackie Ford, who are donating their time today to interpret our panel for us, so we're very appreciative of that. So I'll move on to letting our panelists introduce themselves and telling everyone today why they're here.
You're good.
Hello. 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 Am I on?
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Salud Carvajal. I'm your representative in the House of Representatives. Alexa, is it now where we give our few minutes? Or you want, okay, great. Well, first, let me say how honored I am to be here with this distinguished panel, Andy, Eric, and Richard. And I want to recognize the March for Our Lives students for their leadership in organizing not this event, but speaking out and keeping the momentum going. In particular, Alexa, Ollie, and Audrey, who are major players and instrumental in putting on today's event. Let's give them a round of applause. I was able to attend the March for Our Lives slow march, an event that was held here with my son a few months ago. And I will tell you, that was both invigorating and somber. And somber because yet again, we continue to experience tragedy in our country resulting from gun violence. Invigorating because I think we have a new energy in our country that is going to make a difference, and that is our young people speaking out, saying enough is enough. And that they and we are not going to take this anymore. But despite their energy and all of us speaking out collectively, I am sad to say that I am currently serving in a Congress whose leadership, along with this presidential administration, has not thought it important to take action and move forward any gun safety laws that would improve the safety of our citizens in this country, and in particular, our children in school. There has been a few glimmers of hope in the 2018 omnibus spending bill. We did move forward an increase in the NICS reporting system, incentivizing states to report more effectively incidences of gun violence. Also, we lifted the ban in a bipartisan way, probably next to that, the only positive step that this Congress has taken. We lifted the ban for CDC to be able to now, provided we add the funds, we have not added the funds, do research on this gun violence epidemic in this country. But it's still not enough because the funds have not been allocated to do so. There are a number of gun safety bills that have been proposed, mostly by Democrats, as a result of the activism by our young people, and I would say a new momentum that has come about in our country. We have started to see a number of Republicans, for the first time, joining a number of the bills that have been sponsored as co-sponsors. So there is a movement. Yes, that's applauded. There is a movement. There is a momentum that is starting from previous inaction by this Republican majority. I oftentimes like to say that the NRA has become equivalent with no Republican action, because they have really not stepped up to take more action. I'm proud to tell you that almost on every bill that has been introduced, I have either sponsored it or co-sponsored it. And I'm very proud of that. Congress has held since Sandy Hook 47 moments of silence. 47. As if that is the solution to solving this epidemic. I'm just going to go over a few of the items that I have sponsored or co-sponsored, which I think encaptures a lot of the issues that we have been advocating for in this country that need to be addressed. So I'm just going to rattle them off. I'm not going to go over each one of them because I think I will be up here for a long time. So the first one is the Gun Violence Restraining Order Act, allowing families and law enforcement to work with the courts to be able to temporarily take guns away or prohibit individuals from purchasing guns. The reason this is so important, and it's the one that I'll spend a little bit of time on, is because it's something that we have felt has been missing in our country. California legislature was able to move this legislation forward, and I'm trying to do the same thing at the federal level. As a result of the Isla Vista mass shooting, and where one of our panelists lost his son Christopher, and you're going to hear more about that. We realized that this was one tool that might have made a difference back then, and will help save lives in the future. So that is one piece of legislation. Next is the Stop Straw Purchase Act. Then the HR 1832 to authorize the appropriation of funds to the Center of Disease Control so they could actually get the funds to do the gun violence epidemic research. Yes. HR 3947, Automatic Gunfire Protection Act, which addresses a bump stock ban. HR 367, establishing a select committee on gun violence prevention. HR 4052, Keep Americans Safe Act, prohibits large capacity ammunition feeding devices. HR 4240, Public Safety and Second Amendment Rights Protection Act, which is universal background checks. And HR 5087, which bans assault weapons, and it's called Assault Weapons Ban of 2018. And since I got this sign, I'm almost done here. HR 3207, zero tolerance for domestic abusers. Those are just a few of the bills that I have to conclude. I served in the Marine Corps. I know what assault rifles do. There's no place we have no place for those on our streets. And two, when I was a little boy, my sister committed suicide with a revolver. I know too well tragedy, and I think we need to do everything possible to keep the momentum up and to pass many of these gun safety laws. Thank you very much.
Before we move on to Andy, I would like to ask that the panelists now stand while they answer, that way that everyone can get a chance to see you. Thank you.
Thank you, especially at my height. I'm Amy Pease. I'm on the San Luis Obispo City Council. I've just been on a year and a half. My other profession is as an architect. I do green building architecture, so I do those two jobs half-time each. And I'm a parent. I have a daughter who graduated a few years ago and one who's graduating in just a couple weeks from San Luis Obispo High School. So super relevant on the one side, and on the other side I'm on the opposite side of influence of Salud Carbajal here. Cities have almost no influence, ability to legislate for gun control. And in preparation for this, I just checked with our city attorney, like, okay, well, can we do this? Can we do? No. There's like two areas that are specifically allowed. By the time you do the federal controls, that limits what the states can do, then the states then in turn limit local control. So one that we can do is if there's concealed, you're allowed to have concealed weapons in California, and the local jurisdiction can say whether or not you need to permit it. So we do in the city. We do require a permit. It's with a full background check, and it takes some time, but we charge a nominal fee because we want to make sure people do it. Fewer than a dozen in a year. It's not a big influence. They also let us have a little bit of control over gun shows, because that's just for safety and zoning and timing and scheduling. That doesn't really come up for us. So I'll be interested to hear. It's good to watch other communities and see what things they want to take on from a legislative perspective as far as gun control. I know, like in Los Angeles and Sacramento, they look to ammunition. Well, we can't control guns, can we look at ammunition? And so tracking of ammunition was what they were able to do. It's not really relevant for us. They were trying to look at a lot of gun violence in their communities. So legislatively, I'm not going to be able to contribute very much except to go salute, right? Which is valuable. But I think that local government is, that's the most accessible form of government. That's why I ran for this. At a time when national and state and even county government can be super divisive, the local city government is a reminder that democracy can work, that we can influence. So as we continue to have this conversation and think about programs and policies and working with our schools and working with activists and working with students, what are the types of programs that we can encompass to address a broader culture to support folks who might be socially isolated, who might be slipping through the cracks, who might turn toward violence? What are the ways that we as a community can come together at this very local level while we advocate in the biggest way possible for national and state laws? What can we still do locally? So that's what I hope to be working on. Thanks.
My son, Christopher Ross Michaels Martinez, was born here in San Luis Obispo at Sierra Vista Hospital in 1993. He graduated from SLO High in 2012, and he was shot and killed in Isla Vista, California on May 23rd, 2014. He was a student in his second year at UC Santa Barbara, and he was 20 years old. Since the day that he was killed, the only thing that's been important to me is to try to do something about gun violence. I had a career of about 20 years as an attorney. And since Chris was killed, I have not been back in the courtroom. It just doesn't seem important to me anymore. Chris was kind, smart, funny, and he was competitive. He played sports here in San Luis Obispo: soccer, baseball, basketball, football, tennis, and he just loved competition. I was encouraging him to try to get an interest in sciences, and so at my suggestion, he took some science classes at UC Santa Barbara, but none of it stuck. And he was determined to go to law school like his father and mother. And Chris's mom's an attorney as well. And it was just in his competitive nature. He liked the idea of arguing and the competitive nature of being an attorney. And for us, it was just devastation. Chris's mom would never be, her mom, who had been in good health, died a year after Chris did. And so when I watch news and I see Las Vegas or Parkland or Pulse or Santa Fe High School, I think about what those parents are going through, and I remember what we went through. I can remember watching coverage of the Pulse shooting, and some of the first responders were saying that when they went into that nightclub after the shooting, that they could hear cell phones ringing besides the bodies that people had been shot and killed. And that was us, That night, we didn't know what happened. We were told that Chris had been hurt, and we were trying to call him. And we drove from here to UCSB, and the whole time we're calling, and his cell phone would have been ringing there beside him where he died. He was shot in front of the delicatessen in downtown Isla Vista, and he fell and he died. He died right there in the delicatessen. 10 kids were shot that night, and 3 died. It's Memorial Day weekend, and during that time we think about those that have served our country and died for our country, to defend our country. And if you go to Washington, D.C., and you're on the Mall, and somewhere in there between the Washington Monument and Lincoln Memorial, is the Vietnam War Memorial. And if you go there and you stand in front of it, it towers above your head, and all the names are on the wall. And as you're standing there, you look one way, and it seems like it just goes on. You look the other way, it seems like it goes on. On that wall, there are about 60,000 names. The Vietnam War lasted about 10 years. And every year in this country, 13,000 Americans are killed in gun homicides. If we built the Vietnam Wall Memorial for civilians who have been killed in this country during the past 10 years, it would be twice the length of the Vietnam War Memorial. It would be more than twice the length of the Vietnam War Memorial. We can do better.
Thank you for having me here today to speak to you. I'm Eric Trader. I'm the superintendent of San Luis Coastal Unified School District. We have 16 schools serving nearly 8,000 students. So this is a relevant and highly appropriate topic for us to discuss. It weighs heavily on myself and on our school board and all of the employees that serve students. I want you to first know that I view this as a public health crisis in America. And we are at ground zero. When we open our doors every day to our schools and our students walk in, our parents, our community, and society in general expect us to keep our students safe. So I want to talk about school safety and student safety through the lens of a former principal and teacher. I led schools as a principal for 15 years, and I learned a thing or two about keeping kids safe. And I just want to share with you something that I learned. And it's not to diminish the important work of security, because I will talk about that. But what I learned the most, and the most profound thing I learned, is the best way to keep your school safe and keep kids safe is to know the kids well, to know what is going on with the lives of your students. And this is a tall order, but what we have that we're really skilled at, is that we're not necessarily skilled at security. What we are skilled at is relationships and knowing our kids. And so I made it a point to ditch the walkie-talkie and instead relate and get into an engaging conversation with every single student at my school. Every single one of them. And something happens when you do that. When you know every child by their name, and you make it a point to even know their parents, something happens. And what happens is you get into a relationship with your community, and you get into a relationship with those students and their families, and pretty soon that circle becomes pretty tight. And for me, that is a singularly critical and important issue that we have to develop within our schools. Now, you can't do it alone. We have classified, we have support staff, we have counselors, we have teachers, and we have administrators. And with that, what I want you to know is we as a school district have adopted this idea of developing a culture of care. And with that, we have included this component of mental health as a critical feature of that support. Because when you look at the profile of the American shooter, there is an unmistakable mental health component to it. These are individuals all too often that either are marginalized, neglected, isolated, left behind in their minds or in reality. I've watched it. So what San Luis Coastal has done just in the last year is we've invested heavily in additional mental health therapists at our middle and high schools. Okay, I better hurry it up. And in addition, this is as we go into next year, we've invested in another full-time counselor at San Luis Obispo High School, lowering the ratio of student to counselor to about 275 to 1. All of our schools have counselors. All of our schools are trained to connect. Our principals, our whole administrative team, our staff are committed to knowing every kid and getting to know one another. And we're going to put a big focus. One of the things we just did recently is we put a report a concern button / bullying button on all of our schools' websites and our district's websites. And along with the retail component, and with that, what that will do is create a culture when students see something that isn't right, when parents see something that doesn't seem right, when we see something that doesn't seem right, we have an anonymous mechanism to inform me and my staff on, oh, we better get in there right away. So becoming well-informed, caring deeply, and knowing our kids. I know I have to go. That's just one. The 5 frames I do look through as I talk about this. Culture of care, mental health. That's one frame. The other frame is safety planning, comprehensive safety planning. The third is social media. We've got to get integrated into that. We have to know what's going on. Access to guns and linking accountability to parents who allow access to those weapons to their children. Partnerships with law enforcement are critical, and empowering them, as Congressman Carbajal mentioned, empowering law enforcement so they have greater authority to extract weapons when there are those types of concerns. And by and large, I see this as an integrated collective response, and this is a good first step. Thank you.
So now that we have a little bit of background on all of our panelists, I can transition into our questions that we have prepared for them. So our first one is for the Congressman, and this is: to what degree of influence do you think lobbying groups similar to the NRA should have in politics?
Let's stand up, everyone. Well, I like to think that citizen interest lobby groups, such as our ordinary citizens, should certainly have equal, if not more, ability to lobby their representatives in Congress. Certainly, the NRA has been effective, and they have a stronghold through the contributions they make to members of Congress. I got an F grade by the NRA. It's probably the only F in my lifetime that I have been very proud to receive. But certainly the NRA has been effective in stopping Congress from moving forward with sensible gun laws. You know, this president, time and time again after a tragedy, has spoken out and said that he was going to do something. He has a meeting with the NRA and all that changes. It's really been unfortunate. But I believe ordinary citizens should have equal, if not more, right and influence with their Congress.
Thank you. And a quick follow-up question before you go away is what solutions do you have for keeping special interests outside of campaigns?
Well, I think we need to pass campaign finance reform. Since the Citizens United decision that came forward by the United States Supreme Court, we now have a flood of money, dark money, in our elections. And until we get a different Supreme Court with a different composition that perhaps takes a different opinion in the future, we are bound by having to move forward a constitutional amendment, and we know that's difficult. But short of achieving that, what we can do is move forward legislation that sheds light, transparency on where all this money is coming from. We need to move forward bills. I've introduced a number of bills. I've co-sponsored a number of bills. One with Mr. Bill Ostrander, who's from the San Luis area, and we need to do more. So that's really how you do it.
Thank you. Also, a quick reminder, if you have any questions on your index cards, just hold them right up and we'll come and collect them. Okay, our next question is for Mr. Martinez. And that question is, can you talk a little bit about the intersection of gun violence and mental health, and how have you seen these two issues intertwine in your time as an advocacy for gun violence?
In Isla Vista, in that shooting, the shooter's parents had called the police about 2 weeks before the shooting, and had told the police that their son was unstable. He had a long history of mental health issues and also a history of being resistant to treatment. The night that he killed my son and the others, his parents had also called the police again saying the police should check on their son because they believed he was unstable. Four months after the shooting in Isla Vista, the California legislature passed the law that the congressman just told us about. The California legislature passed the red flag law, and then the governor signed it in September of 2014, within, I guess it was 4 or 5 months after. And what that law does is it allows family members, immediate family members, or law enforcement, if they see signs that a person is a danger to themselves or other people, they can go before a judge, and the judge can listen to the evidence, and if the judge agrees, he can order that the person not be able to buy a gun or to buy ammunition or to have a gun or have ammunition. Now, in Parkland, the kids said everyone knew. Everyone knew that this was the kid that would do this kind of thing. It was no secret. His behavior had been unstable for years. Since the Parkland shooting, the Florida legislature passed the red flag law based on the California law. And that is, you have to understand, I now work for Everytown for gun safety. I work full-time on gun violence prevention. I've done that since about 6 months after my son was killed. And so, I'm immersed in it. I work with the Everytown Survivor Network, which is a group of survivors from all over the country who express an interest in being advocates against gun violence. And so one of the measures that we've been pushing for throughout the country, and state legislatures throughout the country, are red flag laws based on California's. After Isla Vista, Washington State passed a red flag law,
Oregon State passed a red flag law, and now I've lost track of the total, but the numbers are growing. It's something that makes sense. Immediate family members and law enforcement are in the best position to see if somebody is mentally is unstable. And if they're going through difficulty, whether it's a danger to themselves or to other people, they should not have a gun. And so that's one measure, one common sense measure that's being implemented. And I think I saw a statistic in Florida, it's already been used like 20 times, something like 20 times in Florida since it was passed, since the Parkland shooting. So it's not going to work in every instance, but it's something that can be used to address that problem. I'll keep going. The issue, one of the aspects, we talk about mental health, we talk about mental illness. One of the most pervasive elements of gun violence in our country is misogyny. You know, it's not. And sometimes that rises to the level of mental health, I suppose, or mental illness. But more often, it's related to anger issues and alcohol. You know. Last week in Texas, a woman's ex-husband went into a home, killed her 3 children, her boyfriend, and wounded her, telling her that he was going to spare her, and then he killed himself. That's the face of gun violence, the everyday gun violence in our country. It's not so much a manifestation of mental illness directly, or it's misogyny, and it's directed towards women and children. That's the most common type of gun violence.
So, Woman, please, could you give your opinion on where you see the connection of mental health violence?
Sure, thank you. You know, clearly we have all the evidence in the world that there is a profound connection. And then the next question would be, what are we doing about that as a community? County, in our area, the county is in charge of public health, mental health services. And thankfully, we've seen some really improving partnerships with a connection between mental health and the services that can be connected, like with our police department, so that our police department has more access. So there's more nuance, right? We don't just need police with guns and handcuffs to be able to come in. We want folks who are trained to be able to deal with anybody, including their mental illness, because as we've all seen, there are some really horrible stories of people who are having a mental breakdown, and the police are responding in such a way that aggravates the situation to have more violence rather than being able to identify what that issue is and being able to de-escalate the situation. So I'm really proud of our local law enforcement for being able to engage in that type of work. I think it's also, as Dr. Prater talked about, the importance of engaging and connecting with our students and our young people overall. So some of the programs that don't seem necessarily as connected are absolutely part of a whole mental health spectrum and a safety net. So whether it's the Parks and Recs program, that are after-school programs, whether it's creating facilities where youth have constructive things to do, like the skate park and our playgrounds and our open space. So I think that there's a lot of ways that we can connect to make sure that we have a social safety net as a community. And I think as a community, we also need to recognize where we fall short. Our foster programs are desperately in need of families to serve as foster parents. Our Big Brothers Big Sisters is a super robust program, doing really great work, and again, there's a much longer queue for kids who want to participate than we have an adequate number of adults. And I know that as a community we do a ton already, and coaching and being out there and volunteer, art classes and all kinds of things. And I think we can continue to step up to be a part of that safety net. And then there's one other program I want to make sure that I touch on, because it's one that I'd like to explore locally, would be a gun buyback program. It's been, we've been seeing quite a few of these. There was just one in Santa Cruz, Redwood City, so we've seen several of them. The one in Santa Cruz, they figured, I don't know, maybe we'll get 50 or 60 people, and they collected almost 500 weapons. Right? And of those, I think 17 were assault weapons. Right, so to be able to get those off the street. So I think that's another one of those intermediate steps that we can do. I think a lot of people end up with guns that they've inherited, that they don't want anymore, and we have also more opportunities for better securing weapons. So for those who really do want to have a weapon within their home, there are phone apps that link an ability to be able to have access to that gun, to a specific thumbprint or a facial recognition, so that there are ways to make sure, not only for folks who want to have violence against others, but suicide by gun violence is it's a horror for us. And I think 90, well, I'm sure Richard has the statistics, but when for people who attempt suicide and they use a gun, 90% of those people die. But if they use other means, they have a much higher chance of survival to be able to try again on their lives and come up with different tools. So I think taking that big picture look about securing guns in the first place is super important.
Dr. Prater, before we go back to mental health, where do you see in the big picture as the most important step the education system can take to help end the gun violence epidemic?
Well, as an educator, I have to start with the idea that the earlier you begin nurturing and educating the child and the family, if at all possible, the better. And so for me, implementing preschool programs, that we have a parent participation preschool program where we're educating parents on how to parent, and we're also demonstrating and modeling how developmentally appropriate parenting behaviors might look like at that age. As you might imagine, those programs are only available to those parents that can afford to participate in those things. And so we tried it again. We started our Success for All preschool program about 5 or 6 years ago that focused almost entirely on families that wouldn't otherwise have their child be able to send their child to preschool. And that we've seen tremendous outcomes and results, although we're still in the process of gathering that data. So for me, having a well-trained staff, a comprehensive approach to making sure families, parents, participate in the education of their children and become part of that tribe, if you will, as opposed to an isolated group. I think that schools can play a huge and significant role in bringing families in and encouraging engagement that's healthy, that's productive. And if I could for a moment, one of the things that, while I agreed with everyone on the panel that just talked about the intersection of gun violence and mental health, I think connected to this is what I see is this incredible, I call it an insidious accelerator of bad behavior and omens to come, and that is the prevalence of drugs, especially synthetic drugs that we're starting to see that look like candy, that look and are being promoted as candy. And kids are gaining access to drugs. So that parent education piece is critical, sooner, not later. Middle school, high school, it's too late. We can put programs in, but we have to get to the students sooner. In addition, the prevalence of video games. These aren't video games like maybe I grew up with, I guess. These video games are glorifying violence in the most troublesome ways, where they're almost, the kids are becoming numb to killing on video, and now they come up with the 3D versions, the virtual goggles, where they're actually in these horrific settings and living out warfare or doing things that are just incredibly troubling. You couple that with isolation, and you couple that with coming to school and not having any connection. It is the drugs, it is the video games, it's the isolation, it's not knowing where you fit in, and it's that social media context where you can be anything you want to be, and as brave as you want to be, and as ugly and horrible as you want to be. And it's this part of society that we as educators need to recognize. We need to get in front of it, and if at all possible, start legislating some, I believe, more proactive and rigorous interventions, so the kids don't have access to these things as readily as they do. That's what I think on that.
Now, on a congressional level, Mr. Congressman, where do you see the intersection of mental health and gun violence?
Say, the doctor provided a good intersection as to what, how we might best address this in the most cost-effective way. I think Congress needs to allocate more funding to help states and local communities invest more in mental health. I think we need to be able to provide more mental health services to many of our children who are in crisis, and to help them deal with the anxieties and the pressures that they face. And that's one of the things we can do. Another one is we can invest more money in programs like Head Start, partnering with schools to provide more preschool opportunities, because it's children who are in crisis at an early age that's where you can have the biggest impact on the stresses and crises that we are facing. If you allow many of those early challenges to go unaddressed, they end up actually turning into lower achievement. And it's been said that by the 3rd grade, if children aren't at the proper reading level or education level that they need to be at, they end up feeling inferior and isolate themselves and feel ostracized, and oftentimes the school is not being equipped to address their needs, inadvertently further ostracize children. And then we get a lot more individuals and children who are growing up in crisis. So I think what we could do more at the federal level is make sure that we are assisting with more mental health, more preschool funding, more substance abuse prevention funding, so that we can see more of those programs better developed at an earlier age in our communities.
Now, I know you just sat down, But earlier you spoke about how you were in the Marine Corps and how that has influenced your view on legislation. Can you talk more in depth about that?
Sure. I think for most people that have served in the military, you handle assault rifles, assault weapons. And you see the difference between a gun and those assault weapons and the danger that they pose. Those are made for killing. Assault rifles are not hunting rifles. They are weapons for killing. They have no place in our communities, in our streets. And we tend to forget that they are different from hunting rifles or weapons. And so certainly my experience handling a number of different types of machine guns, AK-47s, M16s, different types of machine gun weapons, I clearly understand firsthand that there's no place for those weapons on our streets. And that's why I'm so passionate about moving legislation forward that bans those weapons once and for all from our communities and our streets.
Councilwoman Pease, a lot of the gun debate occurs on the federal or state levels. However, this issue isn't really permeated in our local debates. As a city councilwoman, do you feel the need to legislate on the city level as well? And what steps would you take to ensure public safety in regards to firearms?
Thanks. I think we've, unfortunately touched on how limited local legislation can be as far as guns themselves. But I do think that we can be proactive. As a city, we have a police department, a fire department, and I think that we have a real opportunity to make sure that we partner with our schools to be able to have responses and presence and relationships and be part of that network. I think there's also an opportunity for a local government to be a part of the lead to ask for, to demand, to advocate things that happen at the state level, right? So, we don't have a state elected member up here, but we certainly have one in our who represents our community at the state, and we have access to that person to be able to say, hey, at the state level, we can enact some of this legislation. So I think it's a really important dialogue to have at a local level. I think you're absolutely right. It hasn't been because we feel like, we don't have a lot of, we have almost no actual legislative ability, but I still think at the city level, at this community level, that we can influence what happens at the state and federal level and demand that our communities be kept safe. Because we're at the local level, we're here on the ground, it's our children, and if our state and our federal government isn't stepping up to be able to do the work, we need to demand better.
Now, an important question that I get asked a lot and that is always on my mind, Mr. Martinez, is how to not remain numb. Because we see it in social media and it creates this sense of detachment from the actual event. And it can be easy, especially with how often it happens, to just kind of remain detached and numb. And so we're, in your time working for Everytown, how do you see people being able to not just fall back into the silence?
I wanted to just add something to what the Congressman's response to his question. There's a documentary called Newtown. And it's about the aftermath in that community of the shooting of the 26 and 7-year-olds and the 6 educators at the Sandy Brook Elementary School. And part of that documentary is footage of the emergency room doctor in front of Congress testifying in support of an assault weapons ban, and he's describing the effect of of the bullets from an assault rifle on a child's body. So, you know, it took me 2 days to watch that documentary. It's hard to watch. But when you listen to that testimony, I don't see how anybody... I'm a veteran as well, U.S. Army, and I've trained with M16, M60 machine gun, shotgun, 45 caliber pistol, and you know, I was trained in those weapons, and those are weapons that are designed to kill people. Not only to kill people, but to kill as many people as quickly as possible, and they have no place in civilian society. How not to keep numb, how not to be numb. You know, I have spoken all over the country about the experience of being a survivor of gun violence. And so for me personally, when I talk about the same things all the time, sometimes you sort of slip into things that you've said before, but at least for me, every time, you know, I can be walking down the street down in San Luis Obispo and I can see Dad and his son walking in front of me, and I think, you know, I walk down the street with Chris, you know, and I miss him all the time, and then when I see this coverage of, you know, the families in Parkland, the families in Santa Fe, I know what they're going through. I've had people, I remember one of the young interns from our organization, Everytown, came up to me and said that she hadn't been personally affected by gun violence, but that she had been inspired by what had happened in Isla Vista to get involved in gun violence prevention. And I said, you know what? You have been personally affected by gun violence. We all have. I don't see how anybody in this country could think about all those little kids, 20, 6, and 7-year-olds, where their parents sent them off to school in the morning in Newtown, Connecticut, to the San Diego Elementary School. And those little innocent children were shot and killed in their school. We as a country have done nothing about that. And yet, every one of us, you know, we're parents, we're grandparents, aunts and uncles. We don't want to think that it can happen here or in our community, but it does. It does. You know, we sent our son off to UC Santa Barbara. I remember taking him to school there. And it was the farthest thing in our minds that he would die there. And yet every day in this country, more families are having the experience of loss that comes from having a loved one shot and killed. And hundreds more are shot and wounded. So it's a reality. We have to face it, and we need to do better.
Thank you. Now we are going to transition into questions from our students. We were very lucky to have both high school students and college students today. So I'm going to open up the mic to them.
Hi, my name is Jen Bassich-Pease. I'm a student at San Luis Obispo High School. I'm a senior. My question is for Dr. Eric Prater. I was wondering what direct measures students could take to prevent gun violence on their campus and make it a generally safer place.
Thanks, Jen. That's a great question. I think that this is my 8th year here in San Luis Coastal, and every year the student leaders become increasingly more aware of their peer groups and the political terrain outside of the school. And I'm so impressed with how the students have, at both Slow High and Moore-Bay High, have brought in the political context into the school itself. And this is not just impacting schools, it's impacting society. And so to answer your question, I think part of what we've done in San Luis Coastal is we've created the Superintendent Student Senate. And I know at each high school, there's also a variation of a model Congress or something like that, a leadership team. My advice, my belief, my hope is that these structures become agencies of change, that they become structures that these concerns can be brought forward, formalized into action, that they can go back to the peer groups. We've implemented the Youth Through Survey, and all that survey, by and large, focused on engagement, safety, and culture. And so there's great ways that we can use those data sets, perhaps even modify those survey instruments to say, how can we as students participate in the safety of our school and make it our school, where those types of things are minimized, conversations can come up. And I think that's a good, empowering student voices at schools needs to happen more readily, and it needs to be taken seriously by myself and by the school board. And I think we're well on our way in San Luis Coastal. Okay?
My name is Minori, and I'm a senior at San Luis Obispo High School. I have a similar question for Mr. Martinez. What specific steps, besides just signing petitions or voting when voting season comes around, can members of San Luis Obispo County take to prevent gun violence? And I know you're involved in every town. There's a lot of great opportunities, so I was hoping you could speak to that.
Well, I'm going to narrow your question down a little bit and say I was recently asked what I would tell the Parkland students. And what I would tell the Parkland students is this. When I was growing up, no little kid in America ever thought about being shot and killed in their school. Ever. It didn't happen. Your generation, for the first time in American history, has been doing lockdown drills since kindergarten. All over this country, little kids are doing lockdown drills, and they know why. They know it's because other little kids have been shot and killed in their schools. It didn't happen when I was growing up. It doesn't happen in other countries at the rate that it does here. And so what I told the person that was asking me the question was, I would tell the Parkland students that when they speak to legislators, that when they speak to our national leaders, they should tell them, I know more about what it's like to live with gun violence than you do. You never had to do lockdown drills when you were in school. I've been doing them since kindergarten. And that's outrageous. It's outrageous that American children, little children, have to be concerned in this country about being shot and killed in their schools. It's gone on for far too long. The idea that more guns is, as I travel around the country, I hear the arguments. There's 4 arguments from the gun lobby. No problem, no solution, guns are the solution, or I have an absolute right under the Constitution to a gun regardless of anything. None of those arguments make any sense. More guns is not the answer to gun violence. It's a solution from the 1800s. It's the 21st century in the United States of America. We can do better.
Good afternoon, my name is Ratik Shingla. I'm also a senior at SLO High, and my question is for Dr. Prater. Now, this year at SLO High, we've had to cut down our security staff to one person, and unfortunately, not only is this person in charge of security, he also has to deal with discipline to some extent, and that kind of stretches him out a lot. And about a month ago, we had multiple break-ins during school where even students' car was stolen while school was in session. My question to you is, are there any steps being taken to address the security on campuses at SLCUSD regarding security personnel hiring more or adding more funding towards security in general? I understand that Measure D is taking steps to add more security, but are there any steps being addressed for right now or next year?
We understand there were some situations at SLO High this year. There are no immediate plans to enhance security, mainly because we had a contract just last year where we partnered with the City of Morro Bay, the City of San Luis for half and half. So we would have a school resource officer, where we would take half the contract, they would take half the contract. And that was in place for about 4 years. And we no longer, with the closure of Diablo Canyon and the loss of that revenue, we had to make those decisions. So at this point, we don't have the school resource officers, but what we do have is a partnership with both police departments where they're there within 2 minutes of anything when we call them. The overall security of our campus, I believe, is still very solid. I know those campus security officers quite well, and in schools that are our size, the 3 administrators, plus the campus supervisor, plus the related staff, I feel it's an appropriate response to the size of the campuses that we have. We can always add more. That's certainly on the table. I'm not convinced it would have solved these issues, but certainly it's open for debate. But as of right now, we feel we have adequate staffing for security. Okay?
Hi, my name is Madison Miller. I'm a senior at Templeton High School. So Templeton is primarily a rural and conservative area. And so my question is for Mr. Martinez. When we're in discussions about gun violence, do you have any strategies you would suggest to responding to individuals who believe that guns should be an unregulated and guaranteed right?
I do. Every Town for Gun Safety is not anti-gun, for anti-gun violence. You know, we had the Second Amendment when I was growing up, and we didn't have the kind of gun violence problem we have today. When you talk to someone like that, the polls show more than 80% of gun owners in this country support criminal background checks on all gun sales. It's only the NRA and a small minority of gun owners that resist that. If you ask gun owners if they support background checks, they will either say, yes, I do, or they'll say, background checks don't work. Now, the response to background checks don't work is possession of methamphetamine is illegal. But drug addicts will still get methamphetamine. Does that mean that we shouldn't have a law that says that methamphetamine is illegal to possess? That law doesn't work 100% of the time. Background checks don't work 100% of the time. But even if they don't work 100% of the time, they stop a substantial number of people from getting guns that shouldn't have them. And so we need criminal background checks on all gun sales. Most people who are anti-regulation, if you start to ask them, well, do you think that we should allow criminals to have guns? they'll say, well, no, but background checks don't work. Well, nothing works 100% of the time. I mean, you can wear seat belts in a car and still die in a motor vehicle accident. That's not a good argument to say that you should stop wearing seat belts. The reality is that when I was growing up, large numbers of people died in motor vehicle accidents. It wasn't one solution that resulted in today far fewer people die in motor vehicle accidents. It was seatbelts, shoulder harnesses, airbags, taking drunk drivers off the road, and gun violence is the same. They are right. There is not a solution to gun violence. There are solutions to gun violence. And we need to fight for common sense measures that will help reduce gun violence in this country. We don't have to live like this.
Hi, my name is Carmen Boquin, and I'm a senior at Templeton High School as well. My question is for Congressman Carvajal. The students at Parkland High School have been very vocal about the fact that this issue has been able to gain coverage because Parkland is an affluent, majority white community. People of color, especially in urban areas, have been facing daily gun violence much longer than this has been a national issue. Can you speak on why it took a mass shooting to start this conversation and what can be done to decrease daily gun violence in these diverse urban areas?
Thank you, and that is to a great extent very true. But daily, what comes to the forefront are these major mass shootings. That's what gets news because we have a preponderance, a density of lives that have been taken. But on a daily basis, we have children, we have loss of life resulting from guns that is happening in significant numbers, especially depressed economic areas, either through suicide or through just gun violence itself. And so you're absolutely correct. That's why we need to allow the Center for Disease Control to have the funds so they could study the preponderance of gun violence in our country. Not just the mass shootings that get all the attention, but this is an epidemic. And we forget by just being caught up with these mass shootings that this is something that's going on every day in communities across the country. And we need to better understand that and keep that at the forefront. And we do that by the various groups, Newtown, other groups that exist. But certainly I think a good start is to fund the CDC so that they could compile a report that could be shared with the American people to show just how pervasive gun violence is in our country. So you're absolutely right. Regrettably, that's what gets the most media attention. It's when you have mass shootings. But we shouldn't forget that this goes on every day in communities across our country, especially low-income communities.
My name is Rory McClish, and I'm a UCSB student, and I attended and graduated from Morway High School. I'd like to direct my question to Dr. Grader. Public school teachers are instructed and often threatened to be apolitical when it comes to controversial issues. However, both for those for and against gun control legislation have the same goal, safety. To what level should teachers be allowed to share evidence, reasoning, and information with their students so that they are fully aware of how gun control legislation, or lack thereof, directly affects their safety?
Wow, that's a great question. Yeah, we've done quite a lot of work on free expression and the First Amendment of public employees in our district. And this has come up this year in our district, where a number of teachers brought flyers and posters into the school. And we're putting those very political flyers, much to what you were talking about, around the dangers of gun violence and no to weapons and so forth, and they were putting them up in their classrooms. And we chose. It's a very narrow line when you're a public school employee to express your political views, especially when you have a captive audience like students. And so this is right on that line, and we were super well aware of it. That message hit my office phone by 8:30 in the morning, just so you know. And so how we chose to deal with it was on a one-to-one basis with the individual teachers. And what we respectfully requested was that we honor their political view, we honor that we understand it, because much like Mr. Martinez mentioned about the students having to go through these drills since kindergarten, well, guess what? So are educators. Kindergarten teachers, 5th grade teachers, high school teachers, going through SWAT drills with their hands held high, walking out of the hallways. It's unbelievable what we're having to do. It's really, truly unbelievable. To answer your question, I would say that we're encouraging people, obviously insisting that people follow the law, but we're also encouraging a relative middle ground when it comes to expression. And there's ways, as long as it's balanced and students have an ability to express their rights, which they have far greater rights than employees do at school. Students have no problem expressing their rights and their viewpoints, right? Right, Boutique? And that's a good thing. Teachers so badly want to participate. So do I. But I understand my role and my responsibility to encourage students to make up their own minds. We provide the forum to educate. We provide the forum within the law to instill a solid education, and we try our best to do that without breaking the lines and tipping over into swaying the public opinion in the classroom. Okay.
Hi all, my name is Erin Pazer, and I'm a board here at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo and the president of the Cal Poly Democrats Club. We've obviously been really moved by this issue in this last year, and we've been involved. We had Mr. Martinez on campus, and we've done a lot of work about gun safety in the last year. And I know that I and a lot of us have been really inspired by the Parkland students and these amazing campus organizers to my left. And so my question is for Councilwoman Pease, and that is that the students of Parkland demanded a lot of attention from their legislators. They demanded that people pay attention to this issue. And so my question for you is, to what extent do you support student protests? How are you going to use your position to continue to support them? And at what point do you think that the protests are going too far?
Thank you very much. I'll take the last one first. How can they go too far, right? I mean, at this point, bring everything you got. I think the student voice is, it brings out a different side of adults. And I think that is super powerful. Even the question about the Parkland students and is this coming out because of their privilege? And I think that using that privilege to empower others is really important. So that students, if you are in a position where you can get a little more attention, for goodness sakes, let's use all of that we can for those who don't have as much of a voice. So I think that's really a huge opportunity. Thank you for bringing that up. Again, I think I would love to hear more ideas about how, at a local level, we can help empower students to be able to to be effective, how we can advocate at a state and federal level in order to work on this type of safety. But you know, our city council, our mayor, are all very open and accessible to be able to have meetings, to have conversations, to have ideas. You know, we have a budget, we have, just like the school, there are constraints on a budget, and at the same time, if a community rallies together and say, we need this thing more than we needed that thing. I know we thought we needed that thing, but this thing is now so important that we have to be able to do that. So I appreciate the student engagement, absolutely.
Alright, so now we have a little bit of time left. We're going to be reading questions off of some of the index cards that were submitted by people in the audience. So I'm going to hand it to Audrey now, and she's going to go read some.
Okay, this is from the audience for Congressman Carvajal. Does a civilized society need guns?
Well, I think we do have the Second Amendment in this country, and I think there's been various interpretations of what that provides or not. But I will submit to you, I think there's been significant decisions by the United States Supreme Court that have said that while protecting the Second Amendment does not preclude common sense gun safety laws. I think there is an overwhelming consensus in our country that we can protect and have the Second Amendment as it was intended, but there's plenty of room to pass laws that protect and regulate guns. And so I believe we can achieve both. And, you know, certainly we have other countries, Australia, England, that don't allow for certain gun purchases or use or possession. But in our country, we have a different heritage. And rather than falling victim to this debate of, is it the Second Amendment or not? Do you support it or not? We can support and have the Second Amendment, but still have sensible gun laws. And I believe in our country, there is overwhelming support to do that.
Okay, this is from the audience to anyone on the panel. Should the red flag mechanism be broadened to include more than immediate family, like coworkers? So whoever.
You know, I think we can always explore expanding the Gun Violence Restraining Order Act or red flag legislation. But I think we need to start somewhere. I don't need to tell you how difficult it's been to just pass a few. A few. Just, I'll take 3. You know, we haven't been able to do much other than what we passed in the spending bill. The NICS reporting, and now lifting the ban on CDC. But lifting the ban is nothing if you don't allocate the resources so that CDC could do its research. So that's kind of how I view it.
This is from the audience for Dr. Prater. Mr. Martinez described the ways in which misogyny helps perpetuate gun violence. How is the school district working to dismantle the misogyny that is often instilled at young ages?
I didn't know I was going to get that question, but I wrote some statistics down in advance of this meeting because I think it stood out to me. American women are 16 times more likely to die from a gun than other developed countries. Homicide is the 5th leading cause of death for American women between the ages of 18 and 44. Nearly half of American women who are murdered are killed by their intimate partners. And my last little quote is, the majority of mass shootings in the U.S. killed their intimate partners or family members. So I see domestic abuse, I see misogyny, as Ms. Martinez mentioned, playing out in our society. It's undeniable in the data sets. So you ask me, what are we doing in San Luis Coastal to re-educate, maybe enhance the way in which young girls, young women see themselves? And I want to share a little data set with you. I think we're doing okay. This data says, I just learned it the other day. San Luis Obispo High School's graduating class, senior class this year, has 159 of its nearly 300, about 280 graduates attending four-year universities. Of that 159, 100 are girls. 100 are girls, which means, if I do my math correctly, 59 are boys. So I asked the next logical question, why 59 versus 100? And the response I got from a counselor was, because the boys are playing video games and smoking dope. And the girls want something more. This is what I got from a counselor at San Luis Obispo High School last week. Now, I have more questions for you, Ritik, but I will hold that to another time. But my point to you is we start young. We start, our whole educational system right now is focused on teamwork, students learning from each other in small groups, in integrated groups. And what we're finding, instead of the rows, where kids are doing their own work by themselves, more of the expectation is trying to solve complex problems together. And what we're learning is more and more the girls are the leaders of that group. The leaders. And I think that shift has been happening now for the last 5 years, starting in kindergarten. So I think we're well on our way to enhancing the self-image of our young women in our school district.
It's just a follow-up. Hi, yeah, I submitted that question, and I am all for empowering young women. It's one of my favorite things to do. But I don't think that you answered my question at all. Because the problem with this is that there's misogyny on the side of men. And men are murdering women at a huge rate. So my question to you is, what is the school district doing to prevent that? To teach young men to respect women, rather than teach women to respect themselves?
Boy, that's a heavy question. Because I have three sons, all in the school district. And that is answered at my kitchen table with my children every night. The way I raise my children at home instills in them decency and respect for others, especially girls. I have 3 sons. And so in schools, how does that play out? More and more, what we're seeing within the earlier years in elementary, where we're creating ideas of fairness, ideas of fair play, ideas of I'm better than you versus no, together we're gonna participate as a collective. So I will say to you, I think I did answer your question. And the way I answered your question isn't, boys, we're going to get into this room over here, we're going to talk about how we're not going to treat young women. Okay? I don't feel that that would be effective. What is effective, in my mind, is how the adults treat each other collectively, how we treat one another, and also how we get into how we set up our classrooms and how we set up expectations within the classroom, how we are with one another. Now, I'm not familiar with any anti-misogyny curriculum. I'm not familiar with that. But I would argue that the school district, when you look at what it is we do, 7, 8 hours a day, 180 days a week, or 180 days a year during the school year, we are all about equity. We are trying to be all about fairness. That is where we come from. So as young boys develop, and if there are misogynistic tendencies going on in our schools, I would like to believe that we're interceding and we're getting in front of that as a collective body. I know all my administrators, and I know most of our 1,000 employees. And I will say to you that the common theme is around equity and fairness, and we're going to treat each other to that end, that way. That's how we view it.
Take the opportunity to chime in and thank Dr. Prater for that work and an inclusive, trying to create that kind of environment at home. And I think it's critical to recognize that what we're doing just may not be enough right now. And I think that kind of reading like, okay, well, what's next? What's more? And I know when I was in college, taking gender studies was one of the single most important classes that I took, right? That's where I learned what the history was. And then even recently, on kind of a side issue that we're struggling with in the community, just recently completed a class on understanding whiteness and my own white privilege, right? So that's the kind of education that maybe we need to implement at a younger level. Maybe we need to think about opportunities to have that be more intentional so that we understand what's pervasive in a culture, because when you're swimming in the water, you don't necessarily see it. So, thank you.
I agree with all that's been said. But I think we have a real opportunity as a country and as a society right now. There's the Me Too movement, which lends itself to many conversations at home, in our schools, in our universities, to really, well, what is the Me Too movement? What is it that more often than not gets really men that are using their positions of power and influence to harass women? And it's a power play by men that has been going on for years in all levels of our society. And what better time than now to have those conversations on what is this Me Too movement? What's going on? And why is our society finally waking up and saying that is not acceptable? And this is why it's not acceptable. So I think this issue that is front and center in our communities and throughout our country in all sectors lends itself to having more conversations, having more gender studies discussions, and really getting to the root of what it is to educate boys about their wrongdoing and how they're not entitled and how this is a shared, equitable society that we need to strive for.
Question from the audience to anyone on the panel. We are discussing mental illness, misogyny, need for social safety net, video games, etc. Still, why do we have more shootings than other industrialized countries which have also mental illness as well?
Easy access to guns.
And this is from a North County mom and city city council candidate. Can we pass laws, locally or nationally, that make gun owners liable for crimes committed with their guns, if not smart guns or not secured? Goal is an incentive from insurance if guns are smart or stored safely.
We do have technology now where you could use your fingerprint and make sure that the gun only responds to those that have could recognize one's fingerprint. Certainly those are measures that we could consider implementing in the future. It's escaping me the other one. What was it? Microprinting of the bullets, but there's also one other thing you said.
The liability.
Liability. We have insurance for automobiles. If you buy a gun, why not insure it? Because then all of a sudden you have to do actuarials and you have to do all those things. I think all of those are things that, again, someday we could explore implementing. But again, just getting to those measures, we can't even do minor measures when we have the Congress that we have today. A Congress that refuses to act on passing sensible gun violence measures. We need to first start moving some of those measures, and then it's going to take a number of steps before we could do even more. But certainly those are all viable things we could consider in the future.
I think there was also kind of a question about what can local legislators, so somebody who's running for a local office is wondering, like, what can we do? And I would certainly be, I haven't seen that in place. I know we're really limited to what we can do, but out of the box thinking, if folks come up with great ideas and that we want to explore, or if you see other cities doing something and you want to bring that to our attention, I'm certainly open to thinking about other ways to curb violence to get around that system. I see your hand up. I'm going to let the students dictate the question. Sorry. Thanks.
This is again for anyone on the panel. 98 of the past 100 mass shootings have been by men. What kind of differentiated support do you suggest for men and for women to deal with this?
Well, I'll start while these folks come up with other ideas. I think it's super alarming the fact about, as happy as I am for women to be empowered and graduating and going to college at a higher rate, what does that mean about our boys, our men? Where are we falling short? Which goes back to some of that gender studies. That's not just like women's studies empower women, but how do we have men feel grounded and positive in their lives and doing really constructive things? So I think that's
Yeah, I echo that. There's so much that I see happening in the lives of our kids. If you look at the broader economy, there's so much anxiety in our young people, and it's becoming increasingly evident to me that when boys hit that high school, that time in their lives in high school, where they're going to go to school, college, career, what does that look like? I see some young men in particular shielding themselves and finding ways to avoid that hard look into the mirror. And we can do a much better job, I think, of anticipating those things. And right now we're working really hard to articulate more relevant pathways for kids starting in middle school on through high school. So we're using our bond measure to redevelop and refine our high school models, programs, and facilities so that kids have choices and opportunities they wouldn't otherwise have. And that's boys and girls. And so as we're figuring this out and what we're learning is that the sooner we can get in front of our students and our families, middle school, upper elementary school, and start talking about what some of these opportunities and skills that they could learn and run with, we're finding that that is a ray of hope for us. And so as we develop these, what we're calling pathways for college and career, I'm optimistic that we can address some of those things with internships, with collaborations between the chamber and our school district and local agencies. It's really starting to become more developed and refined. I see kids looking at this and getting excited. And it's not just going through high school anymore. There's many more things happening that I think are hopeful that can address that very concern.
A question for Congressman Carbajal. How about a surcharge or tax on new gun sales and ammunition to fund mental health initiatives to prevent gun violence?
I think everything's worth considering. I think we need to first find ways to fund existing programs more, but in our quest to balance our budget, we do need to look at what are appropriate taxes or not, and on what. Just like cigarettes. Cigarette use has gone way down because we tax cigarettes and use those funds for a lot of tobacco cessation programs. And certainly that is a viable option to consider.
This is the last question from the audience for Dr. Prater. What is San Luis Coastal Unified School District doing to combat bullying, not only on campus, but also on social media?
Well, quite a lot, I'd say. We're really concerned about bullying in all of its forms, and it's becoming increasingly subtle how kids are being bullied, and with social media in particular. I've taken a deep dive into this topic and learned that if you are a student in particular subpopulation groups, for example, I refer to these student groups as those students that have a much higher rate of maybe being invisible and or marginalized by the general population, perceived or real. And so what we're finding in our analysis is that the kids that, especially within the LGBTQ community, have much higher rates of contemplating suicide, contemplating depression, having depression, anxiety, much higher rates than their counterpart peers. And so what are we doing? Well, what we started to do is at the very top level, we created a common ground advisory group made up of citizens across the area, representing all different walks of life, including students and staff. And from that, we addressed 3 topics. One is free expression, the other is social media and its negative impacts, and the third is inclusivity. And what we're getting from this group is incredible. And the recommendations that are coming from this group have influenced our actions as we move into next year. So our document that influences our goals, the specific actions that we take as a district going into next year, reflect that feedback from both the student senate, so the student peer group, as well as the common ground group. And what we're really learning is that we need to train our staff on how to become more aware when these bullying events occur, more sophisticated in picking out when, especially social media, occurs in bullying and how we get in front of that. So I mentioned earlier that icon or that button on our website and all the schools' websites as well, that people can anonymously go to this site, click on report a concern or bullying, and they can anonymously report what they just saw or what they went through. That goes directly to my office, and then we know about it, and then we place it exactly where it belongs for immediate intervention. In addition, as I mentioned, we put our limited resources toward additional counseling starting next year, and then a massive training effort to develop anti-bullying protocols and interventions. We're refining our policies. We're really looking at how we intervene, and we are beginning with our administrative team starting at the end of the school year. As we develop their awareness, we'll develop strategies to intervene early on starting this next school year. We believe we'll make great progress with the structures that we have in place and the training we have. So I'm hopeful. One kid bullied is too many. But what contributes to the things we're talking about today is when organizations like mine ignore it. So we'll start with the awareness that it is an issue, and we want to get in front of it aggressively, and that's what we're going to do.
So unfortunately, we had a lot of really great questions that were submitted on index cards, but we don't have enough time to get through all of them. I want to remind everybody that if they do have questions that they want to follow up on, they can contact any of our panelists individually by reaching out to them, either phone call or email. We'll talk to them after this event. I'd also like to thank each one of our panelists for coming. Round of applause. As well as our Women's March organizers, and I want to thank everybody for coming as well. Just a final note, demonstrations like the March for Our Lives that we had a few months ago are what lead to change. And conversations like the one that we had today are what lead to change. Oftentimes, the response to gun tragedies that we've seen, it follows the same cycle. There's a tragedy, there's first responders, there's tweets, and then there's a short discussion that's soon stomped out by a 24-hour news cycle. The Parkland shooting happened 3 months and 14 days ago. The March for Our Lives happened 2 months ago, and yet here we are still discussing gun reform and not letting this issue slip away. I've been saying this since the first time that I ever heard of Emma Gonzalez or Cameron McCaskey, that this is different. As a student who's been politically active for a little while now, I can feel that my peers, their attitude towards politics and gun violence especially, is absolutely shifting. And so my message to everybody here that showed up today is to not give up, because the kids that are here today are definitely in it for the long haul. And together we can all continue. We can all continue we can all continue to have these conversations at our town halls, at our classrooms, and at our kitchen tables. So please don't shy away from learning new perspectives, and don't shy away from sharing your own perspectives either, because if we all work together, we can continue to have these conversations and hopefully work towards that communal progress that we're all looking for.